It seems like sellouts plague almost everything from the music industry to YouTubers to even skateboarding. And it's not an uncommon thing to hear, oh, they were so much better before they sold out. And for some things, this makes sense. Maybe your favorite music group sold out to a label and now they're making music that applies to a wide audience versus a small niche that they were accommodating when you first heard them. And the same can be said about YouTubers who mindlessly shove Raid Shadow Legends, Raycon, and NordVPN down your throats.
Herder, it's me, NordVPN man. I just had sex with your wife.
But I think that skateboarding is a little bit different in that aspect. But before I get into that, I want to lay down the groundwork for what selling out is. By definition, selling out is a common expression for the compromising of a person's integrity, morality, authenticity, or principles in exchange for personal gain, such as money. But the condemnation of monetary compensation for abandoning one's values goes back as far as the Bible, where Judas, a disciple, betrays Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. The first instance of people using the term sellout as a sort of slur was in the early 1900s as a political term, as progressives fought against the growing influence of money and industry in the government. But in the 1930s, after the stock market crash of 1929, the term spread to a more common use along with the explosion of economic resentment. This anti-corporate usage of the term became concealed in the emerging labor union movement in the 1940s. And in the context of the music industry, this term was used exclusively to trumpet success in ticket sales until the late 1950s. And it appears to have first been applied as we know it today to black musicians, by black audiences, and fellow musicians criticizing black gospel and jazz performers who were perceived as having tailored their acts to appeal white audiences. Reflecting on the commercial success of saxophonist Cannonball Adderley, jazz critic Doug Ramsey wrote, "Cannonball was subjected to the standard abuse of jazz artists who won public acceptance. He was called a sellout." Musicians for the next few decades found themselves in a paradoxical role as having to self-consciously manage perceptions of their authenticity. The Who's 1976 The Who Sellout album, with its ironic faux endorsements and jingles, may be the first example of backlash from the performers themselves. By the 1980s, sellout was in common use in not just informal conversation, but also in print, as the 1960s generation took over the levers of publishing and commentary industries. Musicians as varied as Pavarotti, Herbie Hancock, McCoy Tyner, The Clash, Leopold Stokowski, Miles Davis, and Quincy Jones were either attacked, defended, or both. This continued into the 90s with the rise of the hip-hop world, now sensitive on authenticity. Now you may be wondering why I'm talking so much about music when this is a skateboarding channel. And that's because in the late 80s and early 90s, the scene of punk rock and hip-hop was the same audience that was starting to skate. And they were mostly kids or teenagers. While in the music world, you release albums and your audience and fans are also your patrons and buy your music to support you, if you were to get a sponsor or get paid from a product that you promote to your fans, you would most definitely be labeled as a sellout. But in the world of skateboarding, nobody pays you to practice kickflips all day, and sponsors are how most people get their start. To be fair, oftentimes you don't even get paid and you'll be lucky to get a free deck at the end of the day. And that's how you make money in skateboarding. You're nothing without your sponsors. Contradictory to how an artist would be called a sellout for joining a label, typically a skater won't be called a sellout for joining a different skate team. And for a long time, there weren't really any sellouts in skateboarding, or at least none that are still talked about today. It was just so underground and so not mainstream that no big brands were really interested in skaters. But all of this arguably changed with Tony Hawk. Tony Hawk is without a doubt the skater that brought skateboarding into the mainstream. Want proof of this? Ask any random person to name a skater and then leave the comment with what they said down below. Tony Hawk being pretty much the poster boy for skateboarding resulted in him being bombarded with sponsors and advertisers. And back in the 80s, he ended up signing his rights away with some sponsors that ended up using his names with products that he didn't have any association with. While this was mostly ignored back then and was blown off, it definitely would have been a big deal today. It wasn't until 1998 that I could find the next big case of selling out, and this one is a lot worse than what Tony did back in the day. 10 years prior, in 1987, Steve Rocco and Rodney Mullen would establish World Industries, one of the first skateboard companies to be owned and operated by pro skaters. It grew to become a huge success, and was one of the biggest skateboarding companies out there in the early days of street skating and video parts. But in 1998, Rocco and Mullen were offered, well, let's just say, a very large, undisclosed amount of money for their company, World Industries. And that offer was, I guess, just too good to refuse, resulting in both Rocco and Mullen literally selling out by definition. Well, at the time, a lot of skaters hated this because they literally sold their company out to somewhere else. It was kind of forgotten over time, and no one really even talks about it anymore. A few years after it was sold, while under new ownership, Road Industries would also become the first skate brand to be publicly traded, until switching hands again and ending up being a part of dwindled distribution, and dare I say, dwindling away into obscurity after that. 2000 was a very big year for skateboarding, with a huge rise in popularity in the 90s, and now with the mainstream attention of it being watched on ESPN from the X Games, skateboarding was starting to attract a lot of attention and also a lot of money. This was also the same year that Tony Hawk landed the first ever 900, and would end up partnering up with Activision to release Tony Hawk Pro Skater. Although looking back on it today, you can clearly see how beneficial this turned out for skateboarding. Back then, a lot of people called Tony Hawk a sellout for working with Activision and capitalizing on the growth of skateboarding with making a skateboarding video game. But little did they know how impactful this game would become throughout the years, and how many people would start skating simply because of this game. This wasn't the end of it for Tony Hawk though, as he would get barrages of people calling him a sellout with every ad that he was in. And although Tony Hawk has without a doubt the biggest influence over skateboarding than anybody else, he definitely doesn't shy away from sponsors and working with brands. At the end of the day, he's still portraying skateboarding in a good light, and he's also making money from the ads and sponsors to build new skate parks with its foundation, so calling him a sellout just doesn't really make sense. And although I wasn't there to experience it, I feel like a lot of this hate and resentment to Tony or other skaters that were sponsored by corporate brands was caused by people who started off skating in the early 90s and were part of that underground rise of punk rock, hip hop, and skateboarding all at the same time. The things that they identified with became the things that became more mainstream, and with money and more eyes watching, came more selling out, or at least in their eyes. It was also in this late time period of the late 90s and early 2000s that a lot of big brands started to try to get their hands into skateboarding. And skateboarders didn't like this at all because they were just too corporate. A really good example of this is Nike. In 1997, Nike commercially produced their own line of skate shoes, but they were unable to sell many to skate shops as the market was already strongly in favor of companies such as DC, Globe, S Footwear, America, and Vans. Nike was just not considered a core skateboarding brand among the skateboarding community, and it did not receive the necessary level of support that it needed. And also the shoe that they released was just really bad for skating, so that's why people didn't like it either. Skaters just didn't like the corporate infiltration of skateboarding, and this can still be seen to this day, although to a lesser extent with companies such as Zoomies. To go with the corporate and mainstream infiltration of skateboarding, in the early 200s, a select few skaters started getting their own TV shows, most notably Ryan Sheckler and Rob Dyrdek. Now, Ryan was just a kid, and a lot of skaters disliked him because he had sold out at such a young age. And it was a similar story with Rob, although he was already an established skater and he wasn't a kid, but who was also offered a TV show by MTV. And I mean, who would deny having your own TV show on MTV? You'd have to be dumb to do that. But at the time, it was just seen as another example of skateboarding going mainstream, and it obviously met its fair share of opposition. Today in 2020, a lot has changed with the way that people look at sellouts. Today, nobody really cares if you ride in corporate brand shoes, or if you post an energy drink out on your Instagram. This isn't just relevant in skateboarding, but also in most of Western society. Selling out is just seen as something that's expected from you once you get to a certain point. A good example of this is YouTube. If any of you remember like I do, there was once a time that you didn't have every other YouTuber taking 60 seconds out of their perfectly cut for mid-roll ads, 10-minute video to talk about Raycon. In fact, stuff like this was condemned in early YouTube and was seen as selling out. And I remember YouTubers getting downvote bombed and their comments being littered with people calling them a sellout just for talking about a product that a company sent to them. And although I don't think it's exactly a good thing, nowadays for some YouTubers, it's a shameless plug after a shameless promotion, all in hope to squeeze all the milk they can out of their YouTube cash cow.
Let's play Raid Shadow Legends. Start now for free.
No.
Which isn't really met with any criticism, surprisingly. Skateboarding hasn't quite gotten to this point yet, although I'm sure there are some questionable marketing tactics in the industry and some weird product endorsements or some unfitting sponsorships that you'll see every now and then. Overall, to answer the question of why skaters sell out, it's a simple answer that they just need money like everybody else. And in case you didn't know, skateboarding does not get your bills paid without you getting sponsors or winning a lot of competitions, which is even harder than getting sponsors. At the end of the day, sponsorships or selling out per se doesn't take away anything from your skateboarding or skateboarding as a whole, and if anything, it empowers the individual and the community to create brighter opportunities for the future. So, to make a long story short, that's why skaters sell out. If you guys made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and you probably enjoyed the video, so please leave it a like, and also if you're new, make sure to subscribe because 80% of you are not subscribed. What are you guys doing? Come on. And anyway, that's all for today. Thanks for watching again, and I'll see you soon.